per far beato un cor.
Bueno, vamos. Si può, signori, scusatevi se da sol mi presento, io sono il prologo, poiché iscero ancor le antiche maschere mette l'autore, in parte vuol riprendere le vecchie usanze e a voi di nuovo inviami. Ma non per dirvi come via le lacrime che noi versiam son false degli spassimi e dei nostri martiri, non allarmatevi. No, l'autore ha cercato invece pingermi uno squarcio di vita. Egli è per massima sol che l'artista un uom, e che per gli uomini scrivere deve, e dal vero ispiravasi. Un nido di memorie in fondo all'anima cantava un giorno, ed ei con belle lacrime scrisse ei singhiozzi, il tempo li battevano. Dunque vedrete amar siccome stavano gli esseri umani, vedrete nell'odio i tristi frutti del dolor dispassimi, urli di rabbia udrete e risacci di che. E voi piuttosto che le vostre povere campane di strioli, le nostre anime considerate, poiché siamo uomini di carne ed ossa, e che di questo orfano mondo al mani di voi spiriamo l'aere. Il concetto vissi, ora ascoltate come li è svolto. Andiam in cominciare.
Well, I appreciate your time for this interview. I'm David Robinson. I'm a Mexican baritone, and I started singing at an early age. I was professionally, I was probably 18 years old when I made my debut at the Mexican Palace of Fine Arts. The National Palace is called Bellas Artes in Mexico City. And I sang a messenger in Samson and Delilah. It was an extraordinary experience for me. I still remember the conductor was Enrique Barrios, a fine Mexican conductor. And it was my first time in a stage such as Bellas Artes. It was very exciting, but I remember the conductor just had to wave the baton like this, and because the tempi was speeding. So that was my debut, and I stayed there 5 seasons, and I really enjoyed that time. During these 5 years, I also studied the career of business, and my focus was in culture management. And it has been also part of my activity together with as a singer. I've developed culture management and been part of many projects, mainly in California and New York City. In California, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and then later on in Europe, where I've been living for the past 5 years, in Austria, in Vienna. And after that, I've also developed a few projects between Mexico, Great Britain, the United States, and Austria, mainly focusing on the community arts. Well, as a singer, I had a great opportunity to sing many roles here in Bellas Artes. I was really young, 18, 19 years old when I began professionally. And I had an opportunity to go to the United States after they granted me a Fulbright scholarship. I traveled to New York City. It was 2030 approximately. And after that, I got also another scholarship at the Academy of Vocal Arts, a very fine institute in Philadelphia, where I continued my vocal studies. And even though I sang as a tenor many years, recently I started singing the baritone repertoire, which suits the voice very well. We were just finishing a rehearsal today with Rigoletto, and we also rehearsed Don Carlo, Ballo in Maschera, The Masked Ball, and La Traviata, all these baritone Verdi roles that suit the voice very well. We also did Die Tote Stadt, sung by an Austrian composer, and we were also doing some Rossini, but we realized that the voice wants to sing Verdi, and that's something really exciting because it's such a Verdi wrote for the theater, and he had the vision and the passion to write for the singer. And it's very challenging to sing, but it's so well written that when it's executed correctly, it's absolutely beautiful. Something comes together and enraptures and encaptures the moment, and the audience also becomes part of the scene. So my first voice teacher, she lived just a few blocks away from my home, and here in Mexico City. My mom once heard a fine singer, Emma Elena Valdelamar, a wonderful contralto voice, also composer. And we heard her singing, and we asked who was the voice teacher or what was happening there. And that's how I found my first voice teacher, Judith Gavidia. And after that, after a couple of years, I started singing with her, learning how to sing. I was around 14 or 15 years old. Quite young, really, for a young man, especially for the male voice. Sometimes it's better to wait a little longer. After that, I started working with Lupita Pérez Arias, a well-known Mexican soprano, and she suggested I should try out for the Carlo Morelli competition, and I became one of the finalists and won the first prize. They divided the first prize in between a couple people, and I was one of them. It was really an exciting process, and I remember singing really dramatic arias for my age. Shortly after that was when I joined the Palace of the Fine Arts, the National Opera Company here in Mexico, and I made my debut as the messenger in Samson and Delilah after an audition that I sang for the conductor. Back then, the director was Enrique Di Mecche and Enrique Barrios, and they invited me to the audition, and that's how I obtained my first roles and stayed with the company for 5 years before I traveled to the United States and obtained this thanks to a Fulbright scholarship. I was able to further my studies in New York and Philadelphia. What have been some of my finest moments in my career? I've been very lucky to meet extraordinary artists and really fine people. And I think that marks some of the most special moments in my career as a performer, as a singer. And some of the most memorable ones were when I sang the first time at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And it was with one of my idols, Plácido Domingo. And it was in a zarzuela, Luisa Fernanda, and I was performing one of the smaller roles there. And that was quite an amazing experience. Miguel Roa, the director of Teatro Real in Madrid back then, was conducting, and there were it was a cast filled with stellar singers. And another experience was when the first time I sang in Carnegie Hall, which was with Eve Queller and her orchestra. And we did Marino Faliero and Adriana Lecouvreur, and I in both operas performed a couple roles, and that was also extremely exciting to be singing with people like Rockwell Blake or Marcello Giordani, Aprile Millo, and it was really so exciting to be in this extraordinary theater where some of the most amazing performers of all times performed, and I had the privilege just to perform there. I was very fortunate. And while living in New York, also I was able to perform in Lincoln Center at Alice Tully Hall, Un Racconto Fiorentino, which was an opera composed by a priest, by a Catholic priest, and he was a fine composer. And the opera company chose this opera as part of their repertoire, and that's how I made my debut at Lincoln Center. In New York, I sang a lot of zarzuelas, operetta, and opera, and traveled around the United States, performing mainly smaller and sometimes lead roles. Once I moved to Europe, where I've lived a few years, I started singing also in Asia, which led for me to have some contracts in China, Japan, and also the Philippines, and it was really exciting. And the memorable moments are really when you meet the casts from all these different countries and you try to learn a little bit of their language. When another experience was when I traveled to Tel Aviv, to Israel, and to just experience the history that surrounds these places, and it's ingrained in the people that you meet. That to me is some of the most extraordinary experience I've had. The culture experience, the language experience, and to actually meet these wonderful artists and people that are committed to the art form. That I'm very grateful for that, and those are some of the main moments that I would say that marked a special experience. Some others that I could say is also performing with the London Symphony, Candide, with Christian Järvi. That was very exciting. As a child, I always heard the London Symphony in the records and thought it was an extraordinary orchestra, and it is. And that this group of performances led us to perform also with the Munich Philharmonic, with the Bremen Music Festival, and with some others, which afterwards led for me to perform in Paris at Théâtre du Châtelet. So I'm grateful for all those moments, and performing with some of the most amazing artists. Another experience that I can think of is in Los Angeles Opera, when I performed a role in Parsifal, Dritte Knappe, and that was really stellar cast. That was also with Plácido Domingo as Parsifal, and with Matti Salminen and Albert Domen, and among others. So that was really an amazing experience. And Kent Nagano was the conductor for those performances. So you can imagine how lucky I was to be part of these experiences. And now as a baritone, I'm really looking forward to perform roles in the Verdi repertoire, such as Rigoletto, Don Carlo, La Traviata, and some others. Well, this is certainly a difficult question, in a way. Music means a lot to me and has been a companion throughout my life. When I moved to New York City, it was because of music, because of my passion about music and my love for it. That's what led me to move to New York after I was able to obtain this Fulbright scholarship that allowed me to to further my studies in New York City. And music has been a companion. The past 20 years I lived abroad, mainly in the United States, in New York and California, and then when I moved to Europe. And the main reason of all these experiences and travels, whether it was to Brazil or to China and Japan, or the Middle East and Israel, or many of the European countries, it was thanks to music. And that's something that's an amazing experience for me. So music has been a companion, and it still is, and I hope it will remain this way during my entire life. I'm sure it will be that way. My experiences in the community arts, as I was just telling you, in New York City, California, and also then later on in Austria, I was part of many projects in the community arts. For instance, in New York, we collaborated with Julie Tamer's office for Frida's, the movie, the premiere in Museo del Barrio. That was very exciting. Or when the National Symphony Orchestra came, Enrique Di Mecche back then was the director. They had a U.S. tour, and the final performances were at the Carnegie Hall. And just collaborating with the Mexican Culture Institute during these performances and some of the press agencies that we were working together with was very exciting. And at the same time, I was singing also in Così fan tutte in Connecticut, a few performances. So the artist today has to be a producer and has to be a culture manager, and also has to cultivate their own art. We are living in a time where social media is so open, where we have access to everything, and there are so many points of view. So now we can be our own producers, and that has given the opportunity to many artists to show their art and their capabilities. Sometimes not in the traditional way, in a theater or the way that it's done in a concert format. But thanks to all the technology that we have nowadays, we can do this. So culture management has been very important for me, the community arts especially. And that led me to study a master's in culture management in a university in Madrid. And I was finished with the master's last year. And it was just really the accumulation of work that I did for many years in this area, while also performing. Sometimes I would be working more in these projects, and other times I would be traveling and just doing a tour. For instance, in the 90s, I was doing some American operetta like The Desert Song, which fortunately the Philadelphia Inquirer covered for us with very good reviews. And then after that, I was involved in an exhibition of different painters in Trump Tower, where I was also managing a gallery. And now artists sometimes need to do this different kind of jobs, so they can continue performing and at the same time be involved in something they believe in, and something they want to further also their fellow artists. And I believe that's very important. And we're living that time that's become very clear, and there the importance of the arts to transform our societies is more important now than ever. And that's why the presence of artists and to support their presence in societies is very important. In countries like France and other European countries, they understand this. The British as well, who are the ones that began the community arts, have been able to lead in this area. One project that was very exciting for me was a project that we developed between Great Britain, Mexico, and Austria. I was introduced to the community arts in community dance, using dance as the medium in Vienna, where I met a choreographer in the community dance, whose name is Royston Muldoon. And he's very well known for this, especially for what he did with Sir Simon Rattle with the Berlin Philharmonic, where they created a choreography with 200 young people in Berlin. And some of these kids were troubled kids or from troubled areas, and they used dance to bring them together, to show them responsibility, self-esteem. And this kind of project was really excited me, and I really believed, and I saw the change in each of the children that participated. And I saw the same thing they did in Vienna when I was working for an organization there in a couple projects. And I suggested that to some people with political contacts in Mexico, who I have worked before. And thanks to this, we developed with the British Council and the cities of Tijuana and Monterrey the first formal community dance collaboration with Great Britain, thanks to these ideas. And I believe firmly that these projects can change society and the local communities, which need to get involved and need to want in order to be able to obtain this change. Well, mainly I've performed in opera, operetta, musicals. I did Man of La Mancha, and that was really exciting. I was also called 2 or 3 times back by Telsey Casting in New York City for a couple of their productions on Broadway, and I hope that I'll get an opportunity to perform on Broadway sometime. But it was very exciting to be called back by Telsey Casting Agency for some of their productions, such as South Pacific, and that they were looking for part of their cast. I began singing as a tenor, and just under 3 years ago I started singing as a baritone, and I realized that I identify with this repertoire and feel very comfortable, and I've received good comments, excellent comments from colleagues in Vienna, such as Kammersänger Olivera Miljakovic, who I also work with as a teacher, as a coach. We coached the repertoire, and she was an extraordinary singer that sang all over Europe with some of the best conductors of the world. And she really enjoys me singing the baritone repertoire. So that's really exciting to hear that. Well, how did that occur? How did that come about? Back in November of 2012, I was in New York City, and I met for a coffee a friend of mine, a photographer and director, and he always wanted to shoot his first movie, but it was only until then that he was able to do it. He wanted to film La Bohème by Puccini, but in Brooklyn, in a modern version, and he had a cast in mind, and he thought that I would be perfect for a role there. And the role that I performed is called Au P. Benoit. In the opera is Alcindoro and Benoit, and I sing a phrase that Parpignol sings, which is actually a surprise. The movie's coming out in 2015. But what was surprising to me is that my friend, the director, he visualized that I could perform these roles of a bass baritone or a bass that sometimes are given to a bass that is over 60 or maybe even 70 years old. But now here I was 40, and he said, well, why don't you do these roles? I think they'll suit you very well. You're a good actor, and I just think you would be great. So I took the risk and said, okay, I'll do it. It's a great experience. And we had an 11-time Latin Grammy Award winner, Rafa Sardina, who works with some of the best singers in the world. And so it was quite an honor to be able to be involved in this project. Also, Álvaro Domingo, Placido Domingo's son, was involved in the production together with Matias Schmidt. The director, José Luis Cortés, who invited me to the movie, really suggested I should try these roles. And after we finished it, we realized it was perfect. And so that's how I started singing baritone. And that was the way I was introduced to this repertoire. And one day I really woke up and wanted to sing the different arias in this repertoire. And I performed it for several colleagues in Vienna, and they all really thought it was good. They enjoyed it. And the past couple of years I've been working on the different roles, because it takes a while to really obtain a transition and to be satisfied with the expression and the way you use the music to convey a message. And we realized that the Verdi repertoire seems to suit very well the voice, which was a surprise to me, because that's the Verdi baritone is a very particular kind of voice. So I'm very excited and looking forward to performing these kind of roles. I'm hopefully to do my first Rigoletto soon in Germany in a theater at the beginning of 2015. And so this is how the transition came about. Okay, finding your own voice as an artist and as a person. It's taken my entire life to find my own voice. And I don't only mean as a singer, but to know who I am, what I want, and also to be able to surround myself by the circumstances as best as possible, of course. There's so much we can't control, but as best as possible, so I could find my own voice, my inner voice, and express it through my singing voice. That led me to also teach, and I'm very passionate about teaching, and being a means so people can find their own voice. It's very important. The same thing led me to the community arts, because although sometimes you use different mediums like dance, movies, film, music, of course, or just vocal music, you assist every single person that participates to find their own voice. And not only the participants that you are pretending to support and help and further, but also the organizations that are involved, to make them aware of this process, and to also make them aware that it's not about competition or just the image they want to obtain, but it's about working together so we obtain a society and a community that can further their beliefs through their actions. And I believe that in my country, Mexico, that is really an important task. for each of the artists, for each of us, to assist others to find their own voice and to teach people by the experience of these projects in community arts to support each other's endeavors and not to compete against each other. That is a firm belief I have, and I believe that through these projects we can change to some extent the problems that we do have in our present society. But it's a personal responsibility, and it's a responsibility in finding your own voice and committing to work, to things you believe in, and following that through. Some of my future projects include a tour in China. I had the opportunity to sing in Hong Kong a couple of years ago, but I've never been in mainland China. And mid-December we're traveling there with an orchestra, and we'll sing Viennese operetta and some opera. And I'm really looking forward to this experience. It's a 3-week tour. And after that, I'm going to do my debut in Rigoletto, which I'm also looking very much forward to. And it's just what the Germans they call Einspringen, where they invite you as a guest to sing certain performances. Although they already have a fixed cast, they invite guest artists to sing the main roles. And I'm looking forward to singing Rigoletto as well. And immediately after, I'm going to do a mass, a Schubert mass, and the mass in number 2 in G major with a local orchestra in Vienna. So those are some of the projects that are coming up. And I hope to sing much more in my home country, Mexico. Thank you.